We'll dive. So here we are, session 12. It's great to be back with you guys. And we're, like I said, finished up on the terminology. Now we're going to be talking about mining, application, and data collection. Okay. So I want you to start to form your perspective, okay, around, well, okay, Dave, but it's just an application. Like, what's the big deal? And my response is, it's a really big deal because it's much more than an application. You're going to hear this term if you kind of get into this industry and with us, which is you're going to hear me say a lot of this. We are in the business of disqualifying people, okay? And at first that seems negative. You're like, well, that's negative. And it's not, because we're just trying to fit within a certain sort of box of who we're trying to work with, okay? And so part of that journey we have to go through is to decide, are we aligned, right? We do this all the time, right? You develop friendships and you're kind of looking for criteria, right? Yeah. Is this a judgy friend, or is this kind of a good friend that's a good listener, or is this a friend that's, you know, kind of a fair weather friend, and when things get tough, they're out of here? Or is this a friend that's faithful, you know, or not? And so we do this all the time, right? Trying to find a spouse, you're going through the same thing. We date, right? So we can try to figure out, is this somebody that I want to be married to or not, right? So we just walk through this process all the time. Might not just be as cognizant of it. Here, we're just being cognizant. We're like, okay, we're asking all these questions on purpose, with intention, with the idea of mind that when we get to the end of it, we're going to make a determination of whether it is we're going to proceed forward or not. Because time is this precious commodity we have. Everybody's got the same amount. And remember, we can't manage it. It just goes bye-bye. And then we just say, okay, well, what did we just do with that? And I've spent many, many, many days, hours with spending time with people that I shouldn't have. And it just wasted time. I ended up not really doing anything. We didn't make money. It was just a fruitless exercise, right? So through all this hardship, I've learned of this process that I take everybody through in order to help them have the optimized result. Okay, we're trying to optimize your experience, so you don't have to go through and add all these wonderful gray hairs to your head. Okay, plenty of other things in life to help you do that. So, so the first thing is, what did I mean? I kind of explained some of this, but Will, what do we mean when we say mining? You know, what do I mean when I say mining?
Yeah, it's kind of just gathering information on potential clients, kind of to see if they meet our standards, if they meet our criteria, if we could see a relationship with them moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. So you're digging through, you're trying to find out what is the right thing that we're doing. And what we're doing is we're trying to identify, the first thing is we have to have an inquiry. Okay, so Lana, do you remember what an inquiry is?
An inquiry is when we have directly or indirectly discussed a financing opportunity that is either now or in the future.
100%. Yeah, that's exactly it. So we always tell you, I say, look, doesn't matter if it's direct or indirect, we're just trying to log and identify, okay, this is a new opportunity. Doesn't mean it's going to go anywhere. Doesn't mean that it's going to turn into something that actually has teeth, but we do need to identify that had transacted. That's how we're so ratio driven, metric driven, activity driven. We're very driven by that. And people say, well, that's boring. But the reason why is because you cannot manage what you can't measure. What do you think I mean by that? Can't manage what you can't measure.
Basically, like keeping tabs on everything and keeping everything very, I guess, kind of like documented in a way, so that we can make sure that we're prioritizing the best way that we can. You know, if this is a more likely to be fruitful and actually come to action, then this is what we need to focus on most. And if this is kind of 50-50, then that's going to come below.
Yeah. And so think in terms of, so if I go to the gym, okay, and I hire a trainer, okay, and so the trainer says to me, okay, I need to get some stuff from you to see where our baseline is, okay, and he or she says, okay, I'm going to take your fat levels, your muscle levels, I'm going to figure out your weight, I'm going to get all these things, right, to use that as our baseline, and then I'm going to track every week for the next 3 months how you're doing, right? And so we can actually say, okay, well, you wanted to lose 5% body fat, right? And so where are you? Like, are you there? Are you here? Where did you increase or decrease? Right. So, and then if we see those, we can make adjustments, right? To go, well, we've got to tweak that, or you got to eat a little less of this. And so we keep kind of moving the needles so that we can figure out where we need to make adjustments so that we can have success. So that's how we function, is we know all our ratios. I deal with them every week. And then I know if somebody's effective, okay, versus efficient. Okay, so I want you to think about those two things. Effective means I did the work, Dave. You asked me to go make 30 phone calls. I made the first 30 phone calls. Great, that's awesome. But the question I have then is, were you effective? Okay, or were you efficient? So you go, okay, well, what do you mean? Well, I made the calls. Yes, you did make the calls, but were they in the most efficient manner? Okay, were you able to get the maximized amount of people on the phone in those 30 phone calls you made? So did you make the 30 phone calls and you only got 10 people? Or did you make the 30 phone calls and get 20 people on the phone, right? Real different. I did the work, but was I efficient? And I did it, right? Those two things are things we want to try to look at when we're going through the process as well. So just to kind of give you an idea of philosophically how we try to manage things so that we can kind of improve and say, well, we can move the needle a little bit as we go through the process, okay? Okay, so as we go through this, loan or equity amount they are requesting, this isn't too complicated, but I can unpack it a little bit. So why don't you just tell me what we mean by that?
Yeah, well, you just have to know what they're looking for, and obviously with every different kind of a loan, there's going to be a different LTV, a different number associated with what they're looking for.
Yeah, and remember, you guys know, so if I'm talking about loan versus equity, what do I mean by that? Obviously, loan is a loan, it's pretty straightforward, but what do I mean by equity? Equity.
Like how much they're wanting to like keep of the company, kind of like how much they're wanting to have on their own that's going to go into it. I guess like how much money they'll be putting in themselves.
Yeah, so like, yeah, if you think of like you got, so if we go back to the term capital stack, okay? So remember, capital stack is that total amount of the transaction. So if the transaction's 10 million, purchase price, maybe total construction cost, then you're asking the question of how are you going to stack that? You know, is it going to be 75% debt, 25% equity? Okay. 50% and 50%, like how are you going to get to the number, right? It's either debt or equity. And there's really no other way. So most of the times we're doing debt for people, okay? Meaning we're going out and procuring a loan for them to buy the building. So we've got to have a pretty good idea. But there are times where we actually are getting them equity, okay? So they might say, well, I already have the debt. Like right now, I'm working on a deal in Texas. It's about 65 million total, and they need me to bring in the equity, which is about 16 million, okay? So I'm having to go and bring in a partner who's going to bring in the 16 million, okay? So it's not the debt, although I'll probably do the debt too, but it's the equity that's the big need for them. Okay. So does that make sense? Kind of what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so it's like you're bringing in an investor almost, like a outside investor who, in return for the 16 million, he's gonna own X% of that building.
That's correct. Yeah, because if I'm, like we're developing a 70-unit townhouse project right now in town, and I'm the GP or the general partner, okay, who's putting it all together, and then we're bringing in an LP or a limited partner who's going to bring in 80% of the total equity amount. We're going to put in 20, they bring in 80 of that 25% of the total stack. Does that make sense? So if that total amount is 10 million bucks, we're going to put in 2, they're going to put in 8, okay? And that constitutes that 25% of the total stack. So there are times where we will bring in a partner to get the client equity for the transaction. Most of the times they're going to have to put in 10% at least themselves of that equity amount. Okay. So, the debt is just, hey, we're getting you a loan, pretty straightforward. Equity gets more complicated because it's higher risk. Why do you think it's higher risk? Because remember, a loan has a first deed of trust. Okay. But the equity that comes in, they don't. Okay. They don't have anything, honestly. I mean, they're in the partnership, but they have no recourse. Okay. A lender, remember, has a personal guarantee more than likely. And they have a deed of trust against the real estate. An equity partner, most of the times, not always, will not have a deed of trust, and they will just have equity interest in the LLC. Now, could they sue them? I suppose, and they do. It's, if it gets nasty, but they really don't have a lot of recourse.
They don't have much ground to stand on to make sure that they get their investment back.
It's just trust, right? Like you're just kind of going like, I trust you, you know what you're doing, you're experienced. And, that is the risk of equity. Now, remember, what we're always doing is we're dealing with risk all the time, right? Like you're always dealing with risk. And so you're always saying risk versus return, risk versus return. So if I say, well, I want to do equity deal, it's higher risk. Okay. I could lose it, but I could make a lot more money. So I'm kind of playing between those two worlds. Okay. So does that make sense? I just want to make sure I'm.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay, good. So again, for the sake of discussion, we're going to be focusing mostly on debt, but I do want you to know that we do play in that space as well. It's a lot more complicated, and it will be something that we'll learn certainly down the road. Okay. All right. So what do I mean by asset and loan type, Lana?
So basically just talking about what kind of asset they're looking to finance, and then what kind of loan they're looking for from there. And that kind of helps us gauge like what kind of questions we need to ask, what is going to be like big factors, what the big factors are going to be when considering their loan, and who is going to be best to look for the loan with, and what kind of loan they'll be able to get from the type of asset they're trying to finance.
Great job. Yeah, great job. Exactly, right? What's the asset? Remember the food groups we usually deal with, like apartment, office, retail, industrial? Is it, car wash? What is that physical asset we're talking about? And if I'm talking about an apartment, I'm going to ask some different questions. Okay. I'm going to say, well, what's the unit mix? Remember we talked about that. And is it individually metered or master metered, right? That matters to us. And what's the age of the property? And so you start sort of going through this suite of questions. Is it a hotel? Use things like how many keys are they? That's the term they use, which is basically bedrooms. What's the rolling occupancy? Because remember, they're kind of, when you go into it, you're not signing a lease, you're like a couple days. So what's the rolling occupancy, right? So there's all these things you're going to ask if it becomes a certain asset type, which, by the way, we have these questions already laid out in there. But it's just important to you kind of to know, like, okay, I'm asking general questions I'm going to ask on everything. And then I'm going to get into these real specific questions that are real particular to the asset type themselves. So I'm talking about a gas station. I'm asking about underground storage tanks. I'm asking about how much they receive, for the gas per unit. There's all these different kind of unique things you'll want to know. And it's kind of fun because after you've done it for a while, it's just sort of like, oh, that's what I ask. I don't have to think about it. Okay. And then loan types, there are different loan types that we offer, right? SBA, 504, Fannie Freddie, CMBS, Life Company, right? All these different types. So, so questions about that, or does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, good. Okay, cash flow. What is cash flow, Will? What are we trying to figure out there?
Yeah, basically how much money they're bringing in versus how much money they're putting out. That's basically what cash flow is. Looking at my notes, kind of to jog my memory, but it goes hand in hand. I mean, it basically is debt service coverage ratio, like figuring out what that is, if they can cover the loan, and you got to find your primary cash flow source and your secondary source of cash flow. I mean, I can go into it more, but that's kind of just the gist.
Yeah, exactly. So you're trying to figure out is whatever this is that we're doing with them, whether it's a new construction, you're still dealing with cash flow because you're still trying to say, well, what's the future cash flow going to look like? How did you come to that conclusion? If it's an existing building right now, then you obviously want to know the historical cash flow. And so you're trying to figure out that net number. Do you guys remember that little fun acronym that we have? Starts with
EBITDA.
EBITDA. Yeah. So get used to that. EBITDA, EBITDAR, right? Rent is when we add back. That's typically only going to be applicable for owner occupied. But yeah, EBITDA or EBITDAR, right? We're trying to get to cash flow, which is what's available before you make your debt payments. Okay. So that's the accounting function. And so we're always looking at cash flow because guess what? If I look at a deal and I'm like, it doesn't cash flow, I don't know if I need to go much further, right? Or I need to find out what's going on. Because if we don't have cash flow, we don't have a deal. And so we'll probably hit a pause button and see if we need to revisit that. So cash flow is king on most of the deals, unless you're dealing with private money or projection. But again, still is always going to probably come back to that to some degree. Okay. Okay. So what about collateral? What do I mean when we talk about the collateral situation, Lana?
It's something tangible that can be pledged against the loan. And a lot of times it's real estate, but other times it can be equipment or other valuable assets like that. And this is kind of where we're looking at the loan to value and loan to cost ratios.
Exactly. Spot on. You hit it on the head. It's just, what am I leaning? Do I get a lien on something? And then is the loan to value in line with the market? Because we're always asking that question. Is what you're trying to do, Mr. and Mrs. Borrower, lining up with what it is the market says is acceptable? And if it's not, then we need to have that discussion or part ways, right? If they feel like, we need this, it's like, well, I need a monkey that can talk, but we're not going to find that. So, it just, we got to sort of, figure out what's going to work. So, so collateral situation is always going to matter. If you're dealing with a business acquisition, there trickier to get done. They mostly get done with SBA just because they have that guarantee piece that is provided in there. But, you know, for the most part, it gets a little dicey if you're trying to do something that's non-real estate related, because unless you get into 40, $50 million transactions. Lenders don't kind of understand how to go around. They call it an air ball because they're saying we don't have anything to, you know, collateralize. Like, what are we doing? You know, if you go down, we're not doing anything.
We're going with you.
We just lent you $2 million against poof air, right? So nothing to play with there. Okay, let's talk about how we get compensated. This is a big deal. Will, what did we talk about in that video? Do you remember?
Before we do this, can we touch on cash flow for like one?
Yeah, of course.
I just had a question about it real quick. In the videos, you on the PowerPoint, there was like this small business scenario and the personal. It was like this small business cash flow and then the personal cash flow. So say for instance that the business debt service coverage ratio was under 1.25. Could you go and pull from the personal cash flow to kind of make the number 1.25, like to find that sweet spot? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're asking. The answer is it depends. You know, that's what you're gonna love about commercial. You'll never get a clear answer. It's what it depends. It's like talking to an attorney. So, you know, I would say that it depends on the lender and it depends on the situation. If I'm dealing with an established business that has done consistently okay, and let's say that they have a year that's a little bit, you know, rocky, and you know they've given the good explanation, things happened, you know, somebody got sick, I lost this, you know, whatever it is. And they say, but you know, the personal cash flow is such that we can still service the debt, even though we're not quite there. Then under that circumstance, you're probably going to be okay.
Okay.
But you know, if it falls outside of that, and you just see kind of this trend of like, hey, you're not servicing, or it's lower debt service coverage ratio and your personal is higher, then they're going to kind of go, well, you know, you sort of have to have the business to have the personal, unless, you know, one of you guys is working for a company and you're just making salary somewhere, and then that can help offset it. But predominantly when you're dealing with businesses, the lender is saying, we really want to depend on the cash flow as the primary, and then the secondary source of repayment from the personal. If you're doing a startup, then that works great, because they're saying, hey, if things don't work out, you still got your income here and it's a backup, and we're totally satisfied with that. So that's the kind of scenario that I typically see where they're going to sort of jostle for those things. Most of the time it's like, hey, if it services really well on the business side and you're like hitting a 1-to-1 on your personal, probably okay, because we're not going to care as much about that as we do the business, right?
Okay.
So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I was just curious about it, so I thought I would ask the question.
It's a great question. And I would say that it's more the exception than the rule.
Okay.
In that particular situation. So yeah, but good question. Good question.
Hey, thank you.
Okay, so how are we compensated, Will? What's that all about? Do you know?
Yeah. Well, usually the percentage that we charge is anywhere from 1% to 3%, depending on the specific loan. And then there also is a minimum fee. I think it was $10,000 was where it started at. But the main thing with this and compensation is that you have to make it clear up front with the potential client how we are compensated, to let them know to expect, to see if they're okay with it or not. And that'll kind of give you an idea right off the bat if they're worth working for, if they see value in our services. So
Yeah, good. Think about it. Each one of us is raised in different households, and most households, with the exception of, a small percentage, like nobody's like sitting around the table, like having like deep conversations about money and how does it work and how do we function and da 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 da, right? And unless you're living in Dave Ramsey's house, right? You kind of
yeah.
is the financial stuff all over the world. But so it's like money always gets a little bit touchy, right? You're always kind of like, I don't want to talk about money. That's kind of, but in ours, you kind of have to get comfortable with having to talk about money a lot. So you just like, we have that conversation with people for a couple of reasons. We're trying to see what their perspective is on what it is we do. Okay. And it's their perspective on how they view things as a whole. Okay. Because everybody sort of has different worldviews when it comes to money. Okay. There are people that we work with that are just super do-it-yourselfers, pinch every penny, squeeze it all out themselves, right? And like, more power to you, right? But we probably don't work well with them because they're just going to be like, I got to do it all myself, right? And they don't really value the consulting side of it, right? Then sometimes we will address that with people and they just want to negotiate to no end, right? Not that negotiation's bad. We do it all the time, but we always talk about reasonable and fair negotiation versus just unhealthy negotiation. Okay. And when I talk about unhealthy negotiating, it's mean like they can't stop. Like everything we're doing, they're just negotiating every single thing we're doing, right? And it's exhausting. And you're just like, okay, this is getting unhealthy, right? Versus if we're just like having a reasonable conversation about how, is that fair? Would you be willing to do this? Da 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 da, right? And then at times people flat out say, I wouldn't pay that a million years, right? And all these conversations, and then most of the time, right, they're kind of, like, okay, that makes sense. That seems reasonable and fair. And we're looking for those kinds of people that are this. Now, here's the key: fair, reasonable, transparent, and honest. Now, I want you to listen to those four things. Really important, because it's the four characteristics I look for in every client. Okay. And I'm looking and listening all the time. Are they fair? Are they reasonable? Are they transparent? Are they honest? Okay. So they fair, right? And that they're going, yeah, okay, look, you're doing a service. That's fair. We should pay for that, right? Reasonable is basically that, if they're going to negotiate, it's reasonable, right? Like they're not saying, cut your fee and 75%. Like, no, but if they're like, hey, would you be willing to do this, right? That's reasonable, right? Like we're big boys and big girls, right? Now transparent's really interesting because you're like, why would you want something transparent? I understand that. And what we're looking for is somebody who's upfront and clear with you, saying, look, I just want to be upfront with you. Like I am talking with this other group. I'm talking with like, that's good stuff, right? Because now I know where you stand, right? Versus somebody who's like kind of hidey and like, I'm not going to tell them. And then I'll have them do all this work. And then if it works out, great. But if it doesn't, I'll just take off, right? Like, it's like, that's kind of a little bit under wraps, right? I'd rather have somebody be upfront with me about what's going on. Okay. I can work with that. But it's not fair because now I'm like doing all this work and someone's going and doing this. I don't know what's going on. And then all of a sudden I get kind of blindsided, right? And then honesty kind of goes hand in glove with that. And just be honest. What's going on? Tell me the truth. Don't sort of keep things hidden. So those kind of go hand in glove when we're dealing with people. And so we want to have that fee discussion really fast, because I'd rather know real fast if you're going to be any one of those things outside of what I just said, so that I can just make a decision like, hey, I appreciate it, respect you, but we're going to probably move on, right? So what do you guys think about that? I know I'm a little chatty Cathy here, but I want to hear what you guys have to say.
So I think it's best because, I mean, obviously we all see value in it because there's like an importance behind it that other people might not see. But if someone doesn't see value in it, and some people are able to do, everything themselves, and some people can really handle that. They can be their own attorney, be their own,
Yep.
person for every single thing. And I think it's best to just, throw it out there and be like, hey, like, just so you know, this is what we're looking at here. If you want our services, and this is everything that we do. And if you don't, then, best of luck to you. But it's kind of like unfair to both parties to have like them put in their time and you put in your time, and then come to the point of like, oh, well, this is how much it is. It's like a menu. Like if I go and I order food and then it doesn't say how much the food is, and then all of a sudden it's way more than I expected it to be, and they're like, well, you ate it. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, wait a minute. It's like, well, you ate it. Sorry, buddy. It's triple the price you thought. You're like, everybody's mad.
yeah.
They're like, oh my gosh. So it's just better to be upfront and clear, and you will develop better credibility and have more peace of mind just by just being upfront. You won't waste as much time either. So really good thought. Will?
Basically exactly what Lana just said. I think, it's, you don't want to waste your time, and you don't want to waste their time either. You don't want to do a whole bunch of legwork just to figure out that they're not willing to pay what we charge for our services, So yeah, to get that sorted out up front is best in my opinion. But you say you need to mention this early, like how early? Like
Yeah,
conversation you have with them, or
yeah, it's a great question, Will. Look, here's the one thing you're going to learn about this industry is it is an art more than it is a science. Okay. And this is what, if you guys remember, I talked about the people that work really well here is they're humble, hungry, smart, and have grit. Is, the smart part is relationally smart. It means that you have social cues that you can pick up on, right? Like some people, you're probably going to have that earlier than others. Some you might need to do a little legwork, then have, right? So there's not an exact, like you do it right at this point, right? But there is sort of a balance of saying, okay, I think this is probably the right time to have that conversation. So it is earlier than later for sure. And it does happen through the application process, but sometimes I might wait. Well, let me give you an example. I'll give you a couple examples. So there are times when I will do a little legwork in advance because I think it will just add a lot more teeth to when I'm talking about the fee. Okay. So I might do a little legwork and kind of come back and say, here's some options. I think this kind of makes some sense, right? There's other times because I just have enough experience now where I go, I think I need to have this like pretty fast because I just get the sense that this might be a little bit more difficult, with the client, right? So I judge it based upon what I sense is necessary. And I can just pick up on cues pretty fast if I'm talking to somebody, which we can talk about later. But I do try to have it pretty early on, just so I can be transparent. I'm like, look, it's, just always like to talk about fee up front. Just kind of let you know sort of how we generally get compensated. And 95% of the time people appreciate that. 5% people, if they respond negatively, that's still positive because I'd rather know the negative up front, So does that make sense?
yes, it does.
Yeah.
It makes me think of, I served for like 5 years or something like that. And so whenever someone's ordering, like the Prisoner was the most like expensive wine that we had. And so some people, whenever they order it, they're like, you know, they are expecting it to be expensive and they're not worried about the price of it or whatever. And they might, most people are pretty level headed, but some people are like, when you tell them how much it is and you're like, oh, just so you know, it's going to be this much, then they're like, oh, do you think I can't afford it or something like that? And they get like really, really like brash. And then the other people who like, you can also tell people, some people like want to know that and would want to be told and like reminded, hey, this is how much this is. And if you don't tell them, then they're like, well, why wouldn't you tell me that? And now I've got the check and there's nothing I can do about it. So it's like kind of like feeling their vibe. Like, what are they gonna do?
Yes. Yeah, it's exactly it. It's very, you know, we're in the people business. Okay. Yes, we're doing finance stuff, 100%, but you're journeying with people. Okay. And all people have different perspectives. They have different temperaments. Um, and quite frankly, they have just different cultural backgrounds. I mean, you know, and so you have to start to understand that. I mean, people that come from China, just very different. They're slow moving. Like they just take a long time to sort of, you know, work with different people. It's just different. So you just have to learn like, okay, this is different, you know, and you have to be willing to be balanced about that and also to be respectful to, like, you just deal with different types. And I think that that's part of the maturity process of just learning how to feel people out, figure out what's going to be best suited for them too. So, you know, so it's a dualistic journey. And we're trying to figure out if we want to work with them and vice versa. I mean, some people probably get done, maybe they don't want to work with me. That's okay too. And I'm not going to get offended by that. I'm like, okay, that's fine, you know. So yeah, so hopefully that answers your question. I know it's not exactly like, you know, cut, but you know, does that
Just to
make
be
sense?
aware.
Huh?
You just have to be aware of the situation and
You
person
do.
that you're working with.
You do, and I would say it's one of those things that if you end up getting into the space, you know, and it's something that's a go, you're just going to get a lot of reps and a lot of those discussions we're going to have, right? It's like, it's probably a good time now. Here's why. Here's why I would do that, you know, in this situation. And so it just, that's one of those things I can't train in the video. It's, you just have to get reps, you know. It's kind of like things on football field, right? It's like I could talk to you about it, but until you get on that field and you hit somebody, it's like, oh, okay. That's what it's like to hit somebody. Yeah. So wait till you guys have kids. Now you'll get really one. Read as many books as you want, but till you have that baby, you're like sitting in the middle of the aisle and my daughter's crying and I'm turning about 6 shades of red. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed.
You're like, don't look at me. Stop looking at me.
Like,
I
oh
know
my
she's
God.
crying.
And then you know the people that are the parents, massive compassion, and the people have no idea what's like to be parents. They're like annoyed. So all right. So setting clear expectations. What's that all about? Luana, what did we mean by that?
So basically, just what we've just talked about, you know, being really upfront and clear with everything in the beginning so that no one's wasting their time. And here we're talking about loan to values, timelines, fees, like we just talked about, and then interest rates. And then I would even think like we're talking about like how much they're expecting to get out of the loan, like how much they're you know, or like what kind of assets they're talking about, like just looking into everything at like a very surface level glance and letting them know what things are going to look like and making sure that we're clear on what everything's going to look like. So then, you know, if they're expecting something very out of the ordinary or out of line, we can kind of be like, okay, well, just so you know, that's probably not how this is going to go. Just making sure that everyone's on the same page so that there's no misunderstanding later.
Yeah, exactly. It's spot on. And here's the thing, what we're doing right now, like this whole application thing, it takes a lot more effort up front, like you're spending more time. Because a lot of times we want to just like blow and go start working, but it's kind of like stretching before you're going to go work out, right? Like nobody wants to do it. It's like, I want to work out, like I don't want to warm up. I don't want to stretch. I just want to go work out. Right. But if you don't, you probably get injured, and so, you have to warm up. You have to go through this process, and it'll go way better in the long run. And so setting the expectations is a little bit more messy, but it's super important because I'll give you an example. So Dan and all the sales team today, I asked them a question. I said, "What's the biggest frustration you're dealing with right now?" And I do this every so often just to kind of get a sense of like where the salespeople are and what's really going on. And it was pretty consistent across the board that they're like, we're frustrated because right now the rates are kind of going all over the place, and the lender starts here and then they end up here, and because it's just kind of a wonky time for interest rates. And so I said, here's the deal. I said, you have to make it a habit on every one of the conversations that you have to be able to say, look, here's what's here's what's probably going to happen. Like the interest rate's not going to be the same by the time we get the quote, and it might even go up by the time before we close. Okay. So how are you going to respond if that happens? I literally told them, ask that question. How are you going to respond if this happens? Right. And let them tell you. And they might go, I'll probably be fine. Great. Okay. Some people say, I'll freak out and walk away from the deal. Okay, good. It's good to know. Right. So you just, that way, again, it seems kind of like trite or just like, it seems simple, but it'll save a lot of headache, because if they can't handle that, then you just need to go like, hey, I'm sorry. We're going to have to kind of hit the pause button, because we're just in a really volatile interest rate environment right now. And so just those little simple things you have to keep reminding yourself. Okay. Okay. So non-recourse versus recourse. We kind of talked about this before, Will. So probably not a whole lot there, but maybe you can just brush us through this.
Yeah. So it's just knowing what type of loans are recourse or non-recourse, and certain loans like owner-occupied small business, like they're recourse unless you put down 50%. So just knowing which one is which, and then the numbers associated with each loan, if there are numbers associated with that loan. And just really you have to know all those numbers and know which one is which.
Yeah, you correct. You'll have to kind of know the parameters, which by the way is probably the hardest thing to know in this business, is that kind of experiential knowledge of being able to come in and go, okay, I just got all this stuff. Now, how do I regurgitate it and give you consultation advice, right? And you got to be able to know, how do I give them advice? And so recourse versus non-recourse, again, comes back to like, if somebody walks in, it's owner occupied, they're getting an SBA loan. I already know if they're like, I want non-recourse, I'm like, it ain't happening. Like, I'm sorry. It doesn't matter how many times or how much money you put down. It's just, it's 100% recourse, government deal, period. If it's owner occupied conventional, yeah, put down 50% down, got a really strong balance sheet, probably going to get it, right? Or some hybrid. It's like, well, you might get partial recourse or a burn off or something, but you're not going to get full non-recourse. If it's apartment complex, 10 million all day, right? It's just it's normative. So again, just understanding what you're dealing with and being able to advise accordingly. So it's good to remember that. Again, it also kind of tells you people's temperament, and also tells you their experience. If somebody had a really bad experience with recourse in the past, then you're going to feel that from them. Like, I will never do recourse again. It's like, okay, well, what happened?
I hate to tell you this.
You're gonna have some interesting stories. So people that have gotten hammered, before. So just be prepared. Okay, client loyalty. What am I talking about there, Lana?
We were talking about making sure that we are getting a fair shot at the deal. It kind of goes like hand in hand with that whole transparency factor.
Yeah.
If this is someone who is going to be, all across the market, every single day they're meeting with a different company, seeing if they can get a lower percentage or someone who can get them a bigger loan and a lower interest rate, like just every single thing that they can kind of like negotiate on, but like behind the scenes, if they're seeming like that and kind of going towards that side, and that's not someone that we're probably going to get customer loyalty from. And it's also like we want a repeat customer is a great customer because you already know their temperaments, you already know what they are going to do and how they're going to react. And after we've done all of this vetting and all of this like mining to figure out if this is going to be a good deal for us, then it's great to just be able to focus on the loan versus having to worry about focusing on the person at the same time again.
Great job. 100%. It's like I tell people, I said, how you win them is how you're going to lose them, right? So if everybody is just price, it's like, well, they'll cut you for a cheaper price, right? So you kind of have to know if you have a fair shot. And so the transparency is a big deal. If they're shopping it to a bunch of people, probably going to tell you just to walk away unless you go, hey, I'm going to just throw my hat in the ring. If I get it, great. It's like throwing a fishing rod, and it's like, all right, whatever. If they bite, great. If not, who cares? So you just need to kind of know, is this the type of person I want to invest in or not? And that'll come out assuming that they're going to tell you the truth. Fortunately, if they don't, sometimes learn the hard way. Urgency. What is urgency all about? Will we probably have time for one or two more of these?
Yeah, really just figuring out if this client has urgency. I know that's what it is, but does this client have urgency to get the deal done, to get this deal done? Yeah, that's what I just said. I don't know why I'm repeating myself. I'm sorry, but yeah, we don't want to take on a deal where they're kind of dragging their feet, not really sure if they're going to do it. Say like, yeah, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it next week, whatever. We want business. We want to take on clients who have a sense of urgency, who want to get the deal done. So yeah, we don't like procrastinators.
Yeah, it's the number one reason that deals die is the lack of urgency. Okay, it's really interesting. I've monitored this and I'm like, what is the main reason? It's this one right here. If somebody doesn't have a deep, urgent desire to get the deal done, it will not. So here's a couple of examples. If somebody's under contract, that creates a level of urgency. Now they have a time deadline, okay? If they're coming out of a 1031 exchange, now you got real urgency because you got a tax situation that if they don't exchange this property from one thing to the next, that could create a tremendous problem from a tax perspective, where they get no tax if they can exchange it versus if they have a tremendous amount of tax if they don't. Well, there's a time horizon on that, okay, 180 days. So that creates a tremendous amount of urgency, okay? If somebody is coming up on a balloon and their loan is ballooning in less than 6 months, you got urgency. They got to get it done, okay? If somebody is in a big cash crunch and they got to get the money, it's urgency, right? So just think about this. I can't push a rope, right? It's just like not going anywhere.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if somebody is, if a wave is coming, it's kind of like if I go out in the ocean, I'm like, I'm trying to force this wave to happen. Like, come on, wave, or else a wave is coming and I just get on the wave and go. That's a good surfing wave, right? But I didn't create the wave. The wave was just there, I got on. So that's how urgency works. It's there or it's not. You can't manufacture it. And so if it's not there, you're going to have a tough time because someone's not motivated to do it. They're just like, it'd be nice, but not going to do it. Okay.
Yeah.
So just remember that one because it is a the number one thing. If it's not there, you're going to get frustrated because you're just going, come on, let's go. But they're not doing it. Okay. So we'll stop with that today. Okay. But just continue on through this. We want to try to knock through this as fast as we can so we can get you guys on to the other fun stuff, which you start doing some analysis. But it is good for us to go through this because it is preemptively probably one of the most important things you'll do in terms of preserving your time best you can. Okay. So guys, thank you for everything. I hope you guys have a great day. And if I need a good go, I know where to go.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day. Okay.
You too.
Have a good one.